Welcome back to Starbound, everyone. Let's not waste any time creating a new character so that we can actually start playing the game. The first step in creating a character is choosing a race. This is an important decision because just like living in the United States, your race will dictate how successful you are at certain things, like not getting shot by the indigenous police officer population. FRACKIN Universe adds a lot of new races. Starbound's vanilla races are unique enough, but FRACKIN Universe adds even more, and they each have their own lore, backgrounds, and playstyles. Many of these were separate mods from other developers that were eventually merged into FRACKIN Universe, so some of them can lack in some departments, but for the most part they are all pretty fleshed out and integrated seamlessly into the FRACKIN Universe experience. This video would take forever if I went over all of them, so I'll just cover a handful. The Florins are a vanilla race of plant-like humanoids that, despite their appearances, are bloodthirsty maniacs that just love killing.
I will kill anyone, anywhere. Children, animals, old people, doesn't matter. I just love killing.
The Glitch are a vanilla race of robots that were created by an ancient race eons ago, and because of what people think is a programming error, they are culturally locked into the medieval ages, with their culture based on a feudal system based on lords and knights and peasants. Added in FRACKIN Universe, the Nightar are basically vampires, though they are somehow less edgy. FRACKIN Universe also adds telepathic beings that are able to eat radioactive isotopes, crystal-loving scalies, charismatic rodent merchants who basically own the universe, and a whole slew of others. Again, there are a ton of new races, and because FRACKIN Universe actually has integration with some of the most popular mods in the workshop that also add their own races, your list of options can get pretty long, just like this video would be if I gave each and every race a spotlight, so I'll move on for now. If you want a full list, check the wiki for the mod. Unlike in vanilla Starbound, where every race pretty much plays the exact same, each race with FRACKIN Universe installed, even the vanilla races, have their own statistical strengths and weaknesses, and sometimes these can drastically change your playstyle. Typically when it comes to video games, if I can't play a summoner class, I almost always choose a tank. For those of you unfamiliar with nerd shit MMO lingo, a tank is a playstyle in video games that act as barriers between their allies and their enemies, putting themselves in the front line in order to act as a meat shield. I don't know why I like playing tanks, but I've always been fond of them. Now, my mod list of Starbound includes the RPG Growth mod, which allows you to customize your playstyle using a number of features, like base classes, specializations that act as subclasses, professions, affinities, and more. It's a phenomenal mod that I recommend to pretty much anyone that wants to play Starbound modded because it creates a ton of build diversity, and therefore replayability. I'm not really going to get into the details of what I'm running because that's some nerd shit. All you really need to know is that the RPG Growth mod offers really two paths for tanking, one of a paladin or one of a titan. Both of them use a shield, but the paladin uses melee weapons and healing to keep themselves and their allies alive, while the titan uses submachine guns and focuses on armor to mitigate damage. While it would be fun to play the Titan as a meme, because the image of a tank running up to an enemy and pulling out an Uzi is quite entertaining, I wanted to play as a paladin for one simple reason. I don't like the guns in Starbound. In some video games, mainly first-person shooters, the game actually spawns bullets from your eyes or your crotch, and the weapon in your hands is actually just cosmetic. This is for numerous technical reasons, one of which is the problem of, what if an enemy is in between you and your gun? It sounds stupid, but in an FPS game, that is a legitimate technical concern. Think about it like this. If you had the ability to run up to enemy players and grind up against them, preventing them from being able to shoot you because their bullets come from the barrel of their guns, it would be a very, very bad game. This is one of the many reasons why FPS developers learn to spawn bullets from a player's eyes or a player's crotch. However, Starbound is a two-dimensional game. They don't have the luxury of playing with the perspective of the player to simulate this effect, which means the bullets spawn, quite literally, out of the barrel of your guns, and this becomes a problem if an enemy ever jumps on top of you, because then you can't shoot them. If you want to learn more about the history of how bullets work in video games because you're interested, I'll leave a wonderful video from a YouTube content creator called Garbage in the description down below. He's way better at explaining this kind of stuff than I am. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of races to choose from, and some of them have some pretty handy defensive bonuses. I'm not really going to bore you with the how or why I chose what I did, but when it comes to a race with defensive stats, there are really only three options to play as a tank: the Glitch, the Montesi, and the Slime. The The glitch gain bonuses to using shields, and they also gain a unique percentage increase to their defense, which is rare by the way. Most armor bonuses are flat, not percentage based. If you want to hit the armor cap really easily, the glitch are the way to go, trust me. They can also eat pretty much whatever they want, including raw meat, and if they eat robotic food, they actually gain stat bonuses for a couple minutes. The wiki also calls them unsurpassed in tanking, but we're going to go ahead and disprove that in just a minute. Now, the Montesi are a race of beetle-like humanoids who sport a love for Roman culture and art, which, let's be honest, is just really cool. I don't care who you are, but whenever Roman culture is represented really well in video games, it's amazing. They gain defensive bonuses while using shields, including the ability to gain shield health back whenever they perfect block, which is a severely underappreciated stat by the way. This can single-handedly save your ass in combat if you know how to use it correctly. They also gain a +5 flat armor and 20 extra health bonus, neither of which are anything to scoff at. All in all, the Montesi have an awesome cultural aesthetic and are arguably defensively better than the glitch. Now, the last race you might be somewhat confused about. The slimes are worth considering because despite not having any bonuses to shields or health or armor, they do have a constant 1% health regeneration whenever they aren't starving. And, just like the glitch, you're pretty much capable of eating anything you want, including raw meat. So it's easy to keep yourself fed and not starving if you play on survival mode. This health regen does stack with food, medical items, EPP augments, and a whole slew of other stuff, making slimes capable of being really hard to kill because they regenerate so damn fast. It's like trying to kill Deadpool. In summary, a very unique aesthetic with an even more unique playstyle. Now, that's a lot to think about as far as choices go, but I'm just gonna come out and say that I chose Montesi purely for the aesthetic reasons. You can debate whichever race is best at mitigating damage the best. I don't really give a shit. Roman culture is really cool. Look at their statues, guys. Come on, it's not even a competition. Also, I usually play a glitch whenever I run Starbound Vanilla, so I wanted a change of pace, alright? Now that we're all finished creating a character, we need to give it a name. Montesi naming conventions are all pretty Latin soundings, really bringing home the Roman feel for the race. I picked a very serious Roman name. Dicus. And finally, we're off into the playthrough. I skipped the intro mission, primarily because I don't like the game's main storyline, and I've beaten the game so many times at this point that the intro mission is just boring. Now, while I am skipping the intro mission, I'm not really going to explain much lore. If you want story, or whatever passes for this game's story, you really should go and experience it for yourself. The only thing that I really need to explain here is that in the intro mission, you grab the matter manipulator, which is a device given to everyone who graduates from the Protectorate Academy. The matter manipulator allows you to break and place matter, like blocks or furniture. Very useful. It can also be upgraded using manipulator modules, but we can cover that later. After the intro sequence, every Starbound character starts the exact same way. You wake up on your busted-ass spaceship, and you need to get your ship's FTL drive working. In FRACKIN universe, you have the option of choosing the Build Your Own Ship mode, which, as I mentioned last video, allows you to actually build your spaceship block by block from a starting template that you can choose. I opted for the template Miniship, which is the equivalent of piloting a tuna can. While the Montesi did have their own ship template and it did look very cool, I still went with the Miniship for one simple reason. If you pick a large ship and you don't like it later, you have to take it apart. On my test character, I chose a template that was big and I regretted it later because I had to rip everything apart. It was annoying and slow and I wanted to make that process somewhat more bearable for myself later on. So, tuna can it is, at least for the time being. Anyway, after you get your ship choice all picked out, loot the ship locker and then beam down to the planet. Pick a single direction and walk until you find the laboratory of this very kind, sluggy scientist, and they give you a tiny little tutorial on research. The research system is FRACKIN Universe's best feature in my opinion, and it deserves a bit of explanation. You see, in vanilla Starbound, simply picking up a new material instantly unlocks everything that you can possibly craft with that new material. This means that if you mine a new ore, you unlock the refined ingot recipe at a furnace. As soon as you craft an ingot, you unlocked all the stuff that you could theoretically make with that ingot immediately. This is not a great system, because it allows a lot of progression skips. I mean, think about it. Is there anything that stops you from making a new character and going to a high-level planet, mining some endgame ores, and just crafting the best equipment in the game? Once you get past the difficulty of surviving the elements, there's really nothing stopping you from mining endgame ores. Cue FRACKIN Universe's solution to the problem: research. The game has a series of technology trees, each one themed around a certain aspect of the game. One for agriculture, one for geology, that sort of thing. You need to spend research points to unlock these technologies, along with having materials related to the research in your inventory. For example, to unlock an ingot research, you need the ore of that metal. This system adds a sense of actual progression and heavily prolongs a game's playthrough time by a metric ton. Research points accrue over time passively, and they accrue faster whenever you're on planets based on that planet's danger tier. More dangerous planets will give you faster passive generation. Something worth noting is that the passive system will turn off if you're AFK, which is something that I disagree with. In my opinion, AFKing should slow it down but not turn it off completely. I understand forcing players to explore and actually play the game, but come on, don't be the fun police, FRACKIN devs. There are other ways to get research points, but we'll go ahead and move on. If I miss something, I'll cover it later. After you finish the research tutorial, the scientist sends you into a cave that he can detect strange energy signals coming from. Our goal here is to gather the resources that we need to get through this dungeon and into the Ark, the main storyline hub outpost. This requires a couple things, mainly the resources to build armor and weapons to survive the dungeon in between us and the Ark. You can't just walk in there naked with broken equipment and expect to survive. At least that's what the game told me, but I did it anyway. Sure, the first few enemies kinda sucked, but after I looted a couple containers and got a weapon, the rest of the dungeon was incredibly easy. This dungeon also acts as an expedited tutorial for tech, which are like abilities that you can equip onto your character's head, body, and legs. In the vanilla game, these were fairly limited and also locked until you got into the Ark, but in FRACKIN Universe, you get these right off the bat, making them a lot more accessible, which is good. Anyway, there are a couple of places in this dungeon that we can't get to yet, so I do want to come back later after I get some tools to fit it into tiny spaces. It's a good thing that I bookmarked that teleporter in the lab outside, right? Right? Son of a bitch.
Bing bong, hey, what's up? You're doing a bad job.
I know I'm doing a bad job.
After you set a bookmark for that teleporter, we open the gate and then enter the Ark. This is where we meet the least competent person in the universe, Esther. I shit-talk her quite a bit because she's pretty useless in the game's main storyline, and to avoid spoilers, I'm not really going to talk about what she did, but needless to say, she's an idiot. However, I did install a mod that quote-unquote makes Starbound cuter, and it made Esther's portrait force some strange feelings on me. I don't know how I'm supposed to feel about a grandma being that hot.
You! Give her the phone! You are horny!
Teenage hormones aside, our first priority was to get our ship's FTL drive up and running. For now, we research STL drives, which allow your ship to move around in a solar system, but it's still not allowed to leave it yet. After we craft an STL drive, we can then research FTL drives and then craft one of those. However, the FTL drive needs a warp manifold, which you need Erik crystals for. Let's head on over to a moon and get some. Oh, and by the way, the fucking tuna can is really goddamn slow. I literally cannot wait to upgrade my ship. Anyway, Erik crystals are a pain in the ass. They only spawn on moons, and moons in Starbound are... well, let's just say that they're fucking haunted. There are ways to deal with these assholes later, but for now our tactics basically involve mining as fast as we can before our air runs out, or we get vaporized by a ghost. After getting some Arceus, I completely blanked on the fact that you do need tungsten bars for the warp manifold, so we head over to a planet and mine some. Luckily, I found a forest planet in the solar system, and while I was mining tungsten, I found a Florin dungeon, which allowed me to scan enough Florin objects for the first story mission. I grabbed enough tungsten and made the warp manifold, and then I realized I didn't have enough tungsten for the FTL drive itself, so I had to go back and mine some more. And finally, we had an FTL drive. Now we can plunder the cosmos in style. We'll worry about building our spaceship out in a little bit, but for now we had a more pressing priority. We needed a place to store all of our fucking stuff. So, our next goal was to set up a permanent base of operations. The biggest rookie mistake that a Starbound player can make is to use their ship as their main base. You should absolutely 100% never do this. The technical reason is due to storage code getting mangled whenever your ship loads in with weapons in a container, yada yada yada, boring nerd stuff, whatever. The point is that you are far better off choosing a planet or a space station as your main base. I typically go for the latter because I think they're cooler, so that's what I'm doing here. To get our very own personal space station, we needed a transponder. Now, in vanilla Starbound, this is a pretty egregiously lengthy process involving finding an NPC on a generated space station, who then gives you a quest to bring him a bunch of materials. I was not looking forward to having to do this. Fortunately, as I was browsing the new hub added in FRACKIN Universe, the Science Outpost, I noticed that one of the vendors sold space station transponders. Unfortunately, it was sold for 22,000 pixels, the currency of Starbound. Now, 22,000 pixels was a lot for us right now, but it wasn't impossible at this stage of the game, so it was time to explore random planets and loot anything that isn't nailed down. Sure, I pissed off a lot of NPC villagers, but those dumbasses shouldn't be leaving valuables lying around where strangers can see them. Finders keepers, losers weepers. After a few hours, I had the money to buy the transponder. I sifted around the universe, waiting for a solar system that had a funny name so that I could deploy my space station in it, and I eventually settled on one called Goomba 55.
You're gonna turn into a Goomba!
After deploying the space station, I came to a grave realization. I still needed to build a mech to deploy into outer space. While I had done the mech tutorial at the outpost, unlike in the vanilla game, in FRACKIN Universe, if you complete that tutorial, the game does not give you a shitty mech right off the bat. You still have to build one yourself. Another mining trip later, and I had all the components that I needed to build the bare minimum parts to create a functional mech. The next step was building out the starter room, placing a few storage lockers that I upgraded to high capacity using the enhanced storage mod, which I heavily recommend by the way because it is an amazing mod, along with decking out the room with all my crafting stations. This would work for now, but for those of you unaware, space stations in Starbound are modular. This means that you can spend resources to attach new rooms to your station in preset configurations, sort of like building blocks or Legos. FRACKIN Universe even added a few new rooms itself, like the solar panel hallways, which I was going to make very good use of later on for some clean electricity. Later on I would worry about the patterns that I was going to use, but for now this would be more than enough. Now that I had a base of operations, it was time to step up my mining game, because what I was doing right now was not going to cut it long term. Normally, I would just scour planets for manipulator modules to upgrade my mining tool, but FRACKIN Universe actually offered a couple of alternative paths. Not to even mention that apparently FRACKIN Universe also added some additional manipulators that you could craft in the tech tree. So upgrading my default manipulator was just going to be a waste of modules in my opinion. After all, why would you spend a ton of resources upgrading a piece of shit junker car when you could just buy a Corvette instead? One path was to invest in mining lasers. These are basically beam weapons that allow you to mine by zapping blocks at range. These looked quite good, but on a test character that I made earlier, they noticeably hampered my DPS. I assumed that this was due to the particles that they emitted, but even after I installed a mod that removed all particles from the game, they still weren't doing wonders graphically. The other path was to use the mech system. In vanilla Starbound, mechs are... okay, they're bad. I want to like them so much, but holy shit are they terrible. They're big, loud, and clunky, and you can't take them into instanced missions. Using your weapons consumes energy, but taking damage also consumes energy, and your energy pool is a little low, so you can't use a mech for incredibly long expeditions. In addition, the vanilla Starbound only had one mining tool in your entire arsenal for your mech, a little drill, and it falls off in power pretty quickly, making mining using a mech in vanilla not really viable. However, FRACKIN Universe made mechs a hell of a lot more fun to use. Not only did they separate the health and energy of the mech, making mechs have a fuel system, which allows you to refuel and repair them out in the field, making them viable for long-term expeditions, but FRACKIN Universe also adds a ton of new mech parts, like a mech version of the mining laser or upgraded forms of the vanilla drills, which makes them incredibly useful for mining. If all of that wasn't enough, FRACKIN Universe also gives mechs a sprint ability and the ability to enter flight mode whenever they want. This makes mechs noticeably less bulky and gives them some much needed mobility. Something else worth pointing out was that mechs have a mass stat, which dictates their fuel efficiency and armor. Heavier mechs have more armor, and when they landed, they dealt more damage to anything caught in the landing zone. They even had the ability to simply walk over enemies to stomp on them, dealing heavy damage. However, lighter mechs have better fuel efficiency and they moved faster. With all these new options, it was pretty obvious that I was going to utilize mechs. Now, the mech system is pretty simple. You have slots that represent different parts of the mech, like the body or the arms. It's not a very complicated system, but it's also not very interesting to explain, so I'm just going to move on. I hopped upwards through the tiers up until Titanium, upgrading my mech along the way, making especially sure to pick up all the diamonds that I could, because I was going to need roughly 30 of them for the diamond drill mech arms, and trust me, even in FRACKIN universe, diamonds are hard to acquire. Something else to point out by now is the fact that at this point, my character still had no armor on. I have no idea how I got this far without any armor whatsoever, probably all the stat boosts from the RPG growth mod keeping me alive, but it was high time that I researched some mid-grade armor and weapons. I decided to go for carbon fiber gear, made using carbon plates. These guys are a little annoying right now since I had no decent way of getting carbon in large quantities. Ironic since carbon is literally the most common element in the universe, but whatever. At this stage you basically have to convert coal into carbon and it's not a good ratio. It's like 10 coal to 1 carbon, which is a terrible deal. But it's not like I was going to use coal for much else, so that's what I did. The reason I went for carbon fiber gear is because the researcher's set provides immunity to breathing, poison, and all gas effects, as well as granting a +1 research passive bonus, and a nifty little headlight attached to your helmet. Also, it beats continuing to explore the universe completely naked. Another hour or two later, and I had my mech decked out in tier 4 parts across the board. And not just any crappy racial body either, I spent the time researching tritanium, which is an alloy of most tier 4 bars, just to make the Exodus mech body, boosters, and legs. Why? Because it looks cool. Also because the Exodus body is immune to pressure status, and that'll be handy later. I also crafted a fuel efficiency module that will reduce fuel consumption by 20%, giving me a lot more use out of the fuel that I was using for my mech, which at this point was still Arceus fuel. Hopefully that was going to change soon, since I was getting sick of evading those fucking ghosts every time that I needed to refuel my mech. After all that time spent mining, I even had enough titanium left over that I was able to afford my large core room on my space station. At least after spending all my pixels on gold bars from the mining shop. I always overestimate how much gold the space station expansions need. It's a lot. I'll need to remember to pick up all the gold that I find from now on. Anyway, after all of that, I spent a bit of time upgrading all my crafting stations as much as I could. With my mining rig and my character's gear up to my current standards, it was time to divert my attention. I wanted to start running instanced content and the main storyline so that I could get it out of the way, but I wanted a crew to help me out in combat since I was playing alone.
You son of a bitch. I'm in.
In Starbound, crew are NPCs that you can recruit to hang out on your ship after you build them rooms to live in. These crew members can be brought along on your adventures, acting as NPC allies to help you out in combat. For now, you might have noticed the glaring flaw in my plan already, and that was my ship. It was still a tuna can, which meant that it was time to get my ship in working condition. I wanted to build my ship once and not worry about having to upgrade or modify it pretty much for the rest of the game. So I wanted to get this right the first time, and that would require money for the blocks I needed. You see, there's a vendor in the science outpost that sells Montesi-themed furniture and blocks. Very convenient, but also very expensive. In addition to that, the crafting station for ship parts, the ship component bench, also usually used pixels for all the decorative ship parts, including all the Montesi statue figureheads. This means that I was going to need a lot of pixels to get the job done correctly. I could just do what I was doing right now, which was looting everything and selling it for pennies on the dollar, but that was boring. I brainstormed for a little while until I came up with a pretty decent way to create some income. Real estate. You see, the price of living in the US had skyrocketed over the past decade or two, with rent being the main expenditure for most households in this country. So it would stand to reason that by becoming a landlord, I could make a pretty penny by gouging the rent out of some low-income suckers. Sorry guys, I guess you just shouldn't be poor. You see, Starbound has a colony management system, and FRACKIN Universe expands upon that system. You can build homes for residents and then place down colony deeds to invite random generated NPCs to come live in your rooms. In vanilla, the rent system is kind of annoying because you have to manually travel to every single deed and collect rent every once about half hour or so. But with FRACKIN Universe, you have a better, more efficient option. If you craft a colony core and use the new deeds, called Mark II colony deeds, the core will automatically collect rent from any tenant within 128 blocks. Not only that, but it will collect rent using this formula once every 150 seconds or 2.5 minutes. Much faster than vanilla. Now, rent paid is based on happiness, but if you invest heavily into research and colony management, you can make your tenants very happy while also exploiting them for your own personal gain. Win-win situation, right? My plan was simple. Find a planet that was easy to build on and try to pack as many tenants into possible in the 128 block radius around the colony core. In addition, there were a few extra buildings that would make my tenants slightly less happy, but they would also generate research or other materials for me in exchange. I figured that this was a worthwhile investment, so I found a Tabula Rasa planet, which is a unique planet added in FRACKIN universe that has 0 monster spawns, making it perfect for building, and then I got to work. Enjoy the time lapse. Welcome to my colony. Sure, it does look like a prison, but don't worry, it also acts like a prison as well. These little guys are more than welcome to leave if they can find the door, a door which I conveniently did not install. Now, I did craft enough furniture and deeds to support up to 200 tenants, but by the time that I was little over halfway done, my CPU was wheezing out in agony, so I decided to stop at a mere 116 tenants. I could always add more if I wanted to crash my PC later. Let me give you a tour of the place. These are the rooms, each one being the bare minimum needed to legally be classified as livable space according to the colony deeds. Ignore the fact that these rooms are literally only wide enough for a single bed and nothing else. Everyone knows that renters don't have any rights anyway. Over here we have the cameras that I use to generate research by studying my tenants. Definitely not just doing this to be a voyeur, I assure you. In addition, over here we have the blood bank where tenants voluntarily donate their bodily fluids to me. And of course we have the colony core. With 116 tenants at 15 happiness, this thing generates 1740 pixels every 2.5 minutes, or 696, nice, pixels per minute, or a little over 41,000 pixels per hour. In addition, the other colony buildings also passively generated resources for me. Now, I wanted to share some of my findings regarding testing with these buildings, because I was curious if these buildings passively generated resources for me while I was off the planet. From what I can tell, the answer is yes and no. The colony core will collect rent for you while you're off the planet, which is good because that's the main reason why I did this, but from what I can tell, none of the other buildings generate while you're away from the colony, which was a bummer, but I sort of understood why from a technical standpoint. Anyway, let's go ahead and let this thing run for a little while. This was a combination of AFKing and going on random mining trips to certain planets so that I could look at their cores, as some of those planets have very useful liquids in infinite quantities down there. I was especially looking at super dense planets, protoplanets, and irradiated planets, so that I could find oceans of liquid protosite and liquid irradium for use later. Now that we had our income under control, it was easy to buy the blocks that we needed to build our dream ship. A slight bummer is that unlike the Nightar-themed shop in the Science Outpost, the Montesi shop did not sell a placeable version of itself for 20,000 pixels. A little annoying because I would have liked the devs to have added a portable shop, but it's not exactly a massive inconvenience. It's just more weird to me since they added one for the Nightar. I did appreciate the Dragon's Dogma reference in the scan tooltip though.
The masterworks all, you can't go wrong.
Building your spaceship is made much easier with a couple of things, like a decent mining tool, which I did not have since I invested all my mining technology into my mech, and I couldn't use that on my ship, yet. So I ended up researching advanced mining tools, which includes a snazzy little titanium drill. Something else that makes your building much easier is a physics field head tech, which allows it to tap F to completely negate fall damage, which is nice, but it also allows it to hold down spacebar to literally float around at will, negating the effects of gravity, or lack thereof. Now, this head tech does consume energy, so long as you aren't on your ship. If you're on your ship, this tech is able to be maintained forever. One final important note is that you do need a way to breathe without oxygen, obviously, since, space has no air. Luckily, our researcher set provides oxygen, but a lot of different backpacks that you can research also possess either longer breath times or infinite oxygen altogether. On the polar opposite side of the spectrum from my colony, I wanted to make a nice looking spaceship and give my crew members decent bedrooms. I also wanted a fairly large engine room for my FTL drive and all the ship fuel add-ons that would go there later. Now, there was one specific feature I wanted to include on my ship, and that was this little airlock room. You might be wondering what this is for, because it's not for aesthetic or roleplay purposes. In Starbound, planets can have sub-biomes underground, like gnome villages. They can also have sub-biomes on the surface of the planet, like the creepy eyeball one. However, with FRACKIN Universe installed, they can also have sub-biomes far above the ground. Most planets have a cloud layer, where you can harvest cloud blocks that can be extracted into water, but what's above that cloud layer is very interesting, and that's the asteroid biome. You see, most planets, as far as I can tell, have these floating asteroid biomes. Most of the time, these asteroid butt fields are going to be pretty barren and not that interesting. However, there is a relatively uncommon variant that has these asteroids jam-packed with ore. And some planets even have unique asteroid biomes with some Lovecraftian-esque themes. Not that there's any really good reason to do so, but in vanilla Starbound, you kinda have to just build up using blocks, as there's no easy way to jettison yourself off the ground. But in FRACKIN Universe, there are multiple ways to get yourself off the ground and enter these biomes. One easy way was using a mech. Mechs can just enter flight mode and then fly straight upwards. However, you might be thinking that the opposite could be true. If you're like me and ever wanted to roleplay as an ODST from the Halo games, you are absolutely correct in assuming that if you fall down from your spaceship and hit the edge of the world space that your ship sits in, you can actually enter the planet's asteroid biome without dying if you had a way to negate fall damage, which we do. You also need a way to drag yourself down without the force of gravity, since you're deploying through the vacuum of space. Or you could do what I did, which was build your ship really close to the bottom of the world space so that it's really easy to hit the bottom. Now, this is a bit of a fine art, and like the ODSTs in the Halo franchise, the mortality rates can be, what's the correct phrase here, statistically elevated at times. There is an appropriate distance from the edge of the world space that you need to keep in mind, since if you build a ship right along the edge and just jump out with gravity still intact, the game will just kill you instantly for some reason. So you need to build your ship far enough away from the edge that gravity stops affecting you, but you want it close enough that it isn't a pain in the ass to waddle your way through the vacuum of space. There is a sweet spot, and in case any of you don't want to commit unalive over and over again to figure out what that is, in my research it seems to be about 23 blocks. Now, that's 23 blocks of empty air, and it's also assuming that you're using a horizontal ship hatch like I am. This is just the right distance where gravity will pull you down away from your ship close enough to the edge of the world space where you're only really a block or two away from warping down to the asteroid biome. Any closer than this and the gravity would instantly kill you. Any farther away and your character, for some reason, has to waddle like 15 blocks or so. So, if you ever intend to do this yourself, keep that number, 23, in mind as you build your airdrop room. There are other ways to do this, like using a pocket anchor or by researching into mechs far enough that you can build deployment pads and then just drop down with your mech. We will probably do the latter at some point, but for now this is probably the most accessible way to do it. Anyway, with all that bullshit explained, enjoy another time lapse, this time of my ship being built. This took a lot longer than I thought, and while I don't consider myself an amazing builder, I do admit that the end result was pretty good. It just took a while, particularly around the big-ass Atlas statue that I wanted to make the centerpiece of the design, while also trying to make this thing look even slightly aerodynamic. It's not the most realistic ship, but it does look cool in my opinion. Just a little side note, the placement function on this statue is rough, to say the least. I spent a lot of time testing how wide the platform on it was to design something in my head, and it was difficult to even get this thing placed down because it's so fucking large. In any case, with my ship finally done, it was time to build my crew. This required more research into mercenary technology and a lot of pixels. If the pixel requirement for the research into mercenaries seems high, then you are in for a surprise. Some of you might have wondered why I went so far with my colony earlier. Surely there was no need to make that much money, right? Wrong, bucko. Look at some of these prices. This one costs 661,000 pixels. Hell, I'm probably not even making enough money at this point. If anything, I need more. I decided on getting a top tier medic, which is a no-brainer, but I also wanted another crew member that utilized ranged weapons. I browsed through the list of crew members added in FRACKIN universe, and I was torn between Cyborg and Volcanologist before I realized that I can just grab both. It's also worth noting that while 12 crew slots seems like a lot, FRACKIN adds a ton of new crew members, and some of them can be very useful in certain situations. At this point, I was ready to blast through all the instance content that I had been putting off in my quest log, along with probably most of the main questline, so let's get started. At least, that's what I would say if this video wasn't already extremely long, so I'm gonna cut it right here. I appreciate anyone that actually made it through all of this rambling mess, and I hope to see you next time. I hope you all have a great day, and thank you for watching.